Christopher Nolan's version of the Odyssey is currently being filmed, and nerds on the internet are already fighting each other online over the costumes. I am one of those nerds, however, so I can't really complain, but I am trying to be optimistic. The news that a new adaptation was being filmed came to me at a very interesting time. I had just finished rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey last summer, and I was really excited for this announcement, but with every new rumored casting decision and on-set photo, I get more and more skeptical, and I worry that I am thinking about this movie far too much for my own mental health. I don't want to be a downer. The movie's not out yet. In fact, I'm pretty sure the only thing we have so far is a teaser trailer that I'm probably going to watch tonight when I go to the movies for the first time in a while. So I haven't seen anything outside of pictures on Twitter, and I'm sure an Oscar-winning director will know how to make a good movie more than I ever will. But I am a little skeptical because I really like Greek mythology, specifically the Odyssey. Like I said in my last Greek mythology video, this is all subjective. I'm talking about this through an artistic perspective and from somebody who just enjoys Greek mythology, but I am not an expert. I do not have a degree in classics. I am not a classicist. I am not a professor of ancient Greece. I just really like rereading the Iliad and the Odyssey every few years. But when something I really like gets an adaptation, I tend to get antsy. Fun fact about me is that I love Frankenstein. I have an odd fixation on Frankenstein's creature. I love Frankenstein so much. It's honestly one of my favorite books of all time. So as you can tell, with Guillermo del Toro's new version coming out, I have been all over the place, and I'm specifically choosing not to interact with any of the teasers or any trailers of it because I fear that if I look at the trailer too much, I'm going to start to pick it apart, and I want to come to it with fresh eyes when the movie comes out. I physically cannot bring myself to watch the trailer. That's how important it is to me. I've done the complete opposite with the Odyssey. I have looked at far too many pictures. I have been on the Reddit threads. It's a problem. Hi everybody, I'm Gabby, and if you're new here, I am an artist. I really like to use this channel to share my sketchbook tours, my crafting videos, murals that I work on, conventions that I go to, things related to art specifically, but lately I've been really into just yapping on here. I like to talk about books. I like to talk about mythology. I want to talk about more children's books in the future. I just reread the Narnia franchise. Point is, lately I've been into yapping, and if you're also into yapping, then this is the channel for you, and then you can also look at my art every now and then. With that all being said, this whole video, it's not that serious. It's really just going to be me telling you what I would like to see in an adaptation of the Odyssey. Like I said before, it's entirely subjective. It's just what I would like to see. And also, I have silly pictures that I'm going to show, and I'm going to put them on here, hopefully, if it sticks. This is like a sheet that I put over a mirror, so if it's a little wrinkly, you don't need to tell me. I know. Now, for those of you that need a refresher, the Odyssey is an epic poem about Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who goes through many misadventures on his way back home after the events of the Trojan War. I'm simplifying it here. He's just having a genuinely awful time, but so is almost every other mortal in this story, including his own wife and son. This story deals with themes like homecoming, hospitality, gods versus man, gender roles, sexual consent, legacy. There's a lot going on here. So there's a lot to explore in any future adaptation, which there are many of, by the way. A lot of people are acting like this is new, never been seen before, but the Odyssey is referenced pretty much all the time. So, you know, it's not the end all be all, which I have to keep telling myself if I don't like this movie. Most adaptations or retellings of the Odyssey that I have seen will tell you the story in chronological order from when Odysseus leaves Troy to when he gets home. They don't really do any back and forth unless they're going to focus on Penelope. I think a lot of you right now are most familiar with Epic the Musical. One thing I think is really interesting about Epic the Musical is that the first song is set during the Trojan War. The rest of the musical then tells you his story and some of the trials and tribulations that he experiences until he finally gets back home. And unless you count the songs by Penelope and Telemachus that are included in later sagas, it is mostly Odysseus's point of view back to front. But if you were to read the epic poem, and I have the copy translated by Annalee Wilson on hand right now, I have the other one by Robert Fagles in a different box, then you know that that's not necessarily the order in which the story is told. The first few chapters actually focus on Telemachus, and it's mainly about him trying to understand how he can fix the situation that he's currently living in, and trying to piece together if his father is actually even still alive. I'm not particularly picky about the order in which the story is told, because I can understand why someone would want to just tell you what's going on with Odysseus first, because there's a lot of moving parts. But I do have a soft spot for stories that do show us what's going on with Penelope and Telemachus first, because it forces the audience to think about why it's so important that Odysseus get back home, to really sit and think about those characters as individual people and not just a prize for Odysseus when he gets back home. I'm not going to get into casting right now because I will be talking about it later on in this video, but I need a visual so that you guys know what I'm talking about. So I'm going to be utilizing the Muppets. And Disney, if you see this, though I can't imagine that this video is ever going to be popular enough for Disney headquarters to see this. If you're not going to take advantage of owning the Muppets by including them in the park, can you at least make more classic lit Muppets movies? Because I deserve to see Miss Piggy in more historical outfits, and I think we all do. So, first thing, the war is over. I don't have time to get into all of the events of the Trojan War. That's insane. It was pretty long. My girl Helen was there. Achilles died. There was a wooden horse. You get it. Odysseus and his men are going home. I'm gonna pin it. I'm gonna pin it because I think if I put tape, it's just gonna fall off. Bear with me. I know that the sun is glaring, but Kermit the Frog is our Odysseus. Think of Kermit as I continue to tell you this story, but I'm not your boss. You also don't have to do that. Oh, and I'm gonna be skipping a lot of names. I'm going to be skipping a lot of nuance. This is a long story, and I'm not, hopefully, going to be editing a 3-hour video. I also didn't print out every character because we were going to run out of printer ink, and so I printed these at the Office Depot. And when I realized that, hey, I might not have everyone because I was going through my Google Docs like a month after I originally wrote it, I was like, I'm not going to do it now. So I don't know, picture Fozzie and Rolf and Scooter as members of the crew. They can be anyone you choose, but I did not print them out. Their fate in this story is to perish, unfortunately, but I know that if this was a Muppets movie, they'd be fine. I would like to apologize to everyone who's Greek watching this. Basically, Odysseus and his men go to this specific island that I've always heard be called Ismarus. Could be wrong on how to pronounce that. I apologize in advance. But they go there to refuel, and also they just start pillaging because those guys were on Troy's side. It's a whole thing. Some of the crew died already first event, but not a lot of stories include it, and I can see why. It's not the most interesting moment in the Odyssey, so I wouldn't be shocked if it was included in Nolan's version. I would be impressed if he did. After that, they go to the island of the Lotus Eaters. And yes, I'm gonna be using the chickens because I don't really think that the people that live there were really all that much of a threat. They're not really forcing anyone to eat the flower or to stay there forever, but they're also not all there, and some members of the crew do eat the flower, and they have to be physically dragged back onto the boat.
That's really good.
I personally really like the imagery of the Lotus Eaters, though. I enjoy when they're included in multiple adaptations. I just think it's neat. I think sometimes it's kind of silly, and so I would be bummed if the Lotus Eaters were not in Nolan's The Odyssey. Next is the whole thing with the Cyclops. This is quite frankly one of my favorite scenes in the entire story. Obviously, it's going to be included. It's included in every adaptation I've ever seen, and I love it. Also, I think that if we ever get a Muppets Odyssey, Sweetums should be playing the Cyclops, because I think it would be really funny if they just like gave him like an eye patch and we're like, there you go. I'm gonna put him over here. The scene with the Cyclops is actually pretty long, but here are the bullet points. I'm just gonna show you what I have written down, okay? Odysseus and his men are trapped in the Cyclops' cave. He wants to eat them. That's important. This Cyclops also happens to be the son of Poseidon. I don't have a picture of who Poseidon would be. Make that up in your brain. Anyway, him being the son of Poseidon is important. Odysseus gives the Cyclops some wine and tells him that his name is Nobody. So that later on, when Odysseus and his crew stab him in the eyeball and he cries out in pain, when the other Cyclops come and they're like, hey, who did this to you? And he says, nobody. They don't listen to him and they leave. And I do chuckle every time. I just love to picture like in ancient Greek sitting down and listening to the story, perhaps even for the first time. And I just know that when they get to that part, they were hooting and hollering. After this, Odysseus and his crew, the ones that are still alive, manage to escape, but not before Odysseus decides to brag and tell the Cyclops his full government name. Like I said before, this is one of my favorite scenes in the Odyssey, and I do really love pretty much any adaptation of it because I think you can push it in a lot of different directions. You could focus more on the comedy aspect, make it really funny. You could focus more on the horror. I have always envisioned the use of practical effects and really making it eerie and creepy in like a 70s, 80s horror movie kind of way. I don't really know what tone Nolan is going for, but that's how I like to picture it. I really like it when the Cyclops just looks unnerving. I think a lot of fantasy creatures get kind of dumbed down when they get adapted. If they're a Cyclops, they look exactly like a regular human being, but they have their eyeball here. Or if they're a centaur, they look exactly like a human being, except with a horse bottom. Same thing with mermaids. And I like it a lot more when they have features that are just like uncanny. After the thing with the Cyclops is the whole thing with Aeolus. I did not print anyone out for Aeolus, but that's only because my ideal version of Aeolus is a human man, specifically the one from, I think, the French miniseries version of the Odyssey. I'm gonna put a picture here. I'm obsessed with this. He gives Odysseus a bag of winds. His men think that Odysseus must be hiding something from them, and they conspire to open the bag. And what they do is just kind of force themselves to start all over, because they're kind of back where they started. Odysseus tries to go back to Aeolus to try to get him to help them again, but when he sees what has happened, he's kind of just like, oh, you are cursed by the gods. You're cursed by the gods, and I am not about to help you again. And, you know, some people get mad at him for that. Not me, though, because I kind of get it. I gave you the tools to succeed, and you couldn't even do that. Something went wrong. The gods must hate you. I'm not getting in the way. Next is the land of the giants. He loses a lot of people in his crew because the giants kind of use them like human whack-a-mole. Move on. Up next is the island of Circe. It has a name, but I'm just gonna keep calling it Circe's Island from now on. You get the drill. Some of the more magical elements that happen when they're on Circe's Island is also one of my favorite aspects to the Odyssey. I don't know, something about it just gives old gothic movie that you find on Tubi for free. You either get it or you don't, and when I was a child, I was obsessed with the John William Waterhouse paintings, specifically this one of Circe. That's the vibe. A lot of stuff happens when they're on Circe's Island, most notably his crewmen getting turned to pigs. This scene also includes an element of divine intervention because we have Hermes. I have chosen Rizzo for Hermes, and he comes to give Odysseus some advice on how to handle the situation with Circe. Hermes tells Odysseus that he must use a very specific herb that will make him immune to Circe's magic. It's not just that he could just walk in to her palace and demand things of her. He was given specific aid. When Circe realizes that her powers will not work on Odysseus, the two have a sexual relationship and she frees his men from her enchantment. I will talk more about that whole thing later. Odysseus and his crew stay on Circe's island for quite some time until Circe helps them get into the underworld so that they can seek advice. I personally think that not enough people know that Odysseus goes to the underworld. I had people who listened to the epic musical who then texted me and they were like, did they invent that? And I was like, no, he does go to the underworld. I think just a lot of people only associate Orpheus as this, ancient Greek hero who has gone to the underworld, but that's not necessarily unique. Theseus has even been there. But yes, Odysseus has been to the underworld. And when he goes to the underworld, he gets to meet or more reunite with a lot of different people. Odysseus's mother, we get to see Agamemnon and Achilles, and they have a whole conversation about the audacity of Clytemnestra for killing Agamemnon. I have opinions on that for later. Will I share them? I don't know. One of the crewmen that died literally right before they went to the underworld back at Circe's island, and we get to meet a prophet. This is the prophet. I'm simplifying a lot here, but he tells them that they can make it back home if they don't eat Helios's cows. After all of that, they go back to Circe's island, and there they do a proper burial of that crew member that I just talked about earlier, and they explain why that's important. I could be misremembering, but I can't really recall an adaptation that even includes that scene, and I wouldn't be mad if it got cut so that we can move on to other scenes. I can understand why a scene like that would be cut, just because this is a character that presumably we don't really care about them all that much. And also we have bigger things to do in the story. But I really do love scenes like that, where they show you certain ancient rituals or things about their religion, because I think it highlights those characters' values and beliefs. It kind of shows you the day-to-day aspects of their culture that we don't really get to see in most adaptations, because most adaptations want to make it feel like just your standard fantasy film. It leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to like the world building, if that's the word that we want to use for a real life culture. I don't know if I'm really explaining myself all that well, but it helps it feel more grounded. And after that, Circe gives Odysseus more advice on how he should get back home, specifically about the obstacles that are going to be in the way. One of those obstacles are the sirens. Now, here's the thing. I did not print this out specifically thinking about the sirens. In fact, I printed her out for a very different character and then I changed my mind. So you may picture her. You may picture a number of Muppets. You may picture no Muppet at all. There's just a lot to play around with when it comes to the character design of the sirens. A lot of modern adaptations go for the standard mermaid-like look, but Homer never really describes the sirens to you. It's kind of up to your imagination, and a lot of ancient depictions, I couldn't think of that word for a second, depictions of sirens make them bird-like, like human head, bird body. I would like to know when we as a society decided that fish people are hot but bird people aren't. I think that's discriminatory. I feel like the mermaid one makes sense because they're sailing, and in our cultural consciousness, the idea of a siren luring sailors to their death is, it's good, it's fun, it's haunting, but we can play around with it. They're usually either mermaids or we don't get to see them at all. A good example of us never getting to see the sirens is the 1954 version of Ulysses.
The rocks of the sirens
We only see Odysseus when he makes the members of his crew use wax in their ears so that they don't hear the music, but he does. And so he's tied up to the mast of the ship, and he tells them not to let him go no matter what he says, because he just really wants to hear it. So really it's just a scene where Odysseus is being tortured, which is, it is what happens, by the way. It is what happens. I know that we all had a good time, hee hee ha ha, with Epic the Musical, but he is not that cool. I would like it. I don't think he's going to. I could be pleasantly surprised. I would like it if Nolan made the sirens into bird-like creatures. The other two obstacles that we should be worried about, and please forgive me if I am saying this incorrectly, is Scylla, which is like a six-headed fish monster, and Charybdis, which is like a whirlpool. 6 men died, but as I keep saying, we have to move on.
Everybody dead, killed! Yeah! Yeah! Then I got sucked into a wormhole. Consequences?
And then after all of that, we end up on the island where the prophet told them Helios's cows would be. And, you know, they're stuck there because of a storm. They're hungry. They're tempted. Men have to eat. Despite the warnings, they do end up hunting and eating the cattle. Zeus punishes them for that, and Odysseus is left as the only survivor. I don't have a picture of a Muppet to choose for Zeus. I played around with a few different ones in my head, but at the end of the day, I think Zeus should be played by a human man. They don't deserve this. Now that Odysseus is the only survivor, he washes up on Calypso's island. Yes, I chose Miss Piggy again. You think I'm gonna have Miss Piggy only as Circe when she could be in the entire movie? Foolish of you to even think that that is the case. She has the range. She has the range, and we've seen her do it before. I know a lot of people don't like Muppets The Wizard of Oz, but they had the chutzpah. They had the vision to make her play every single witch in that film. And for that, I have to give them their flowers, and I must use that idea again. Calypso is Miss Piggy once again. And yes, my pictures of Miss Piggy are bigger than my pictures of everybody else. It's called favoritism. Odysseus is trapped on Calypso's island for many years. He does not want to be there. He wants to leave. She will not let him. But the gods force Calypso to let Odysseus go. Specifically, Athena roots for Odysseus to be set free, and Hermes has to go down to tell Calypso that she has to let him go. Point is, she lets him go, he builds a raft, Poseidon wrecks his raft. Since the man will mostly only know suffering for this story, and he can't catch a break, instead of landing in Ithaca, he washes ashore on a completely different island, where he meets Princess Nausicaa. She was originally going to be Princess Nausicaa, but I like Janice more. And also, I think it would be really funny if Janice is Princess Nausicaa, because the reason I changed my mind was, how funny would it be if Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem were like the royal family of this island who has to hear the sequence of events from Odysseus's mouth? That's cinema. After Odysseus tells her and her family the story of pretty much everything that's happened so far, they decide to help Odysseus. Now, before I tell you what's been going on with Penelope and Telemachus back home in Ithaca, which is ironically what I said I prefer directors not do, we don't have to get into that. I do want to talk about Athena. I have not shown you what's been going on with Athena either, just because I don't know where to interject and show you guys Athena without ruining the chronological order of events. And also, I don't know who to pick for Athena. I played around with this a lot. I was like, Athena should be played by a human person, or Athena should be played by a Muppet, specifically a Muppet that's just as haunting as the ghost of Christmas Past from Muppets Christmas Carol. But I couldn't think of a Muppet that gave Athena energy. So once again, picture whoever you want. Perhaps picture me, since I'm right here. Athena does help him out quite a bit, and she has helped him out beforehand. I just didn't know where to fit that in here in this summary. Point is, this is not her first appearance. She has been here before, and she has specifically been here for Telemachus. Hi, hello, it's me, it's Gavi. Hi, it's me from the future. I'm currently editing, and it's come to my attention that I have been saying Telemachus wrong this entire time. And I could have interjected at any point in this video because I'm pretty sure I've said the name like 10 times at this point. And I apologize in advance, but I will keep saying it wrong for the rest of the video. I don't know what it is. I have been trying to force myself to say Telemachus my entire life, but I can't wrap my brain around it. My brain just wants to say Telemachus. And I think I gaslit myself into thinking that that was the correct way to do it while I was recording it. And then I heard myself just now and I cringed. So just know that I'm aware that everybody else is saying Telemachus. Hopefully you can still enjoy this video despite that terrible blunder. Now in Ithaca, finally, and disguised as a beggar, is Odysseus. Since Odysseus never returned, Penelope has been going through it. Bam, bam, bam. You think she wasn't going to be his wife? You don't know me at all. She and all the other women in that home have been harassed by the suitors, a group of creepy men that I hate who don't take no for an answer. I'm not going to get into the cultural reasons as to why. I'm not going to get into the whole hospitality thing. Just know that she doesn't like them and I don't either. And they won't leave. They won't leave. They're eating them out of house and home, and they don't respect her son, Telemachus. Look at this beautiful family. The suitors are very rude. They don't really respect them. Pretty much everyone thinks Odysseus is dead, and they're just kind of taking advantage of both Penelope and Telemachus' whole situation. One of the things that Penelope does to stall is that she tells the suitors that she cannot get married until she's done with her tapestry, and every night she goes back and she unravels her tapestry, so she has to start all over again. And that works for a while until the suitors find out and they demand an answer. While Penelope is trying to dodge and evade these men, Telemachus is going through his own whole thing on his journey into adulthood. And while he's going through this coming of age, he's also being mentored by Athena. Two of the things that Telemachus has had to do while his father has been gone is, one, there's a scene where he confronts the council and he begs for help with what's been going on with the suitors because they are incredibly disrespectful and we hate them. And another thing that he does is that he goes to visit King Menelaus and his wife Helen to try to piece together what did happen to his father. By the time he gets back to Ithaca, Odysseus is already there and the two reunite as father and son. At the same time, Penelope has switched gears. She is now telling the suitors that she will only marry the person who is able to complete the challenge of the axes. It's a whole thing. I'm really interested to see how Christopher Nolan is going to interpret that, just because I see the challenge being interpreted differently in multiple adaptations, but the shtick is that there's going to be a row of axes, and whichever one of the suitors can string Odysseus's old bow and arrow and shoot through the axes is going to be her husband. And this is, of course, incredibly difficult to do. But of course, Odysseus is in fact here, though he is still in disguise, and he is able to complete the challenge, and then he just goes ape on all of the suitors.
What a woman!
Yeah, my woman.
He reunites with Penelope. I'm skipping over a lot of nuance. I'm skipping over a lot of scenes that happen in between. You get it. Point is, we are finally happy and home. Yay! End of story. Like I said before, there are many adaptations of the Odyssey, and if you want to watch any version of them before Christopher Nolan's movie comes out, I suggest that you do so. In fact, you can find a lot of them here on YouTube for free. One of my personal favorite adaptations is the 1968 French miniseries, which is here in parts. I think it's only 4 parts, and you do need to read subtitles. It's the best one that I have seen, and if I were a teacher, I would make my students watch that one. All that being said, I can understand there being so much hype over this movie. It's a critically acclaimed director with multiple A-list actors. They have a budget. They were filming on location. I can understand being really excited. From here on out, I am going to split the rest of the video into 3 categories. Number 1 being what I think a lot of adaptations get wrong when it comes to adapting the Odyssey, what I would like to see in an adaptation of the Odyssey, and 3, the whole Christopher Nolan of it all. I should preface this by saying that some of these choices are done purposefully. Maybe the director wanted to take the character in a different direction. Maybe they had a very specific vision in mind. Maybe it's not supposed to be a faithful adaptation and they just wanted to use the bare bones of the story to tell a completely new retelling, kind of like Brother, Where Art Thou? And that's fine. But I'm bringing this up because I think that if I'm going to watch a new adaptation of the Odyssey, I would like the directors and the people working on the film to keep these things in mind. Not that I have any kind of authority on that either, but you know, it's my video. One thing that I've noticed when it comes to adapting Greek mythology in general, not just the Odyssey, is that a lot of these adaptations, and I said this in my last video when I was talking about the movies that came out in the 2010s, is that our version of a hero is very different than an ancient Greek hero, if you will. It's not about being the most morally correct person. If you were to ask a random person on the street right now what they consider to be a hero, they would probably say that it's someone kind and courageous and morally pure. They probably have superpowers like Spider-Man, or maybe they're just an everyday person who has very specific kinds of skills that helps regular people stay out of danger, like a firefighter. But there is a difference between a hero like an ancient Greek protagonist versus a hero like Superman. Those virtues don't have to align. They don't have to get along. At least not by our standards, and I think that's important. For a lot of male protagonists, it's not about being selfless and self-sacrificing and loving your friends a lot. A lot of the time, it's about what you are willing to do. It's about being strong, it's about being fast, it's about being smart, and it's about taking advice from the gods when they give it to you. And I can understand why you might want to make those changes for a modern audience. I am not picky about that at all. I can understand why you might want to do that. When I go watch Disney's Hercules, I'm not expecting a lot to be accurate. It's kind of like watching a sports movie. It's a feel-good, cutesy movie. But that Hercules is very different than Greek mythology Hercules. I would personally really respect it if more adaptations from here on would just accept that some of these characters are morally complex and are going to do things that the audience isn't going to agree with most of the time. A good example that I can think of off the top of my head is when Odysseus meets Agamemnon in the underworld. The few adaptations that I've seen that have included that scene cut a lot of the dialogue, specifically the conversation that they have about Clytemnestra murdering Agamemnon. Agamemnon literally says, "There is no more disgusting act than when a wife betrays a man like that. That woman formed a plot to murder me, her husband. When I got home, I thought I would be welcome, at least by my slaves and children. She had such an evil mind that she has poured down shame on her own head and on all other women, even the good ones." To that, Odysseus replied, "Curse her. Zeus has always brought disaster to the house of Atreus through women. Many men were lost for Helen, and Clytemnestra formed this plot against you when you were far away." At once he answered Agamemnon, "So you must never treat your wife too well. Do not let her know everything you know. Tell her some things, hide others. But your wife will not kill you, Odysseus. The wise Penelope is much too sensible to do such things. Your bride was very young when we went off to war." And every time I think of that scene where Agamemnon is complaining about getting killed by his wife, I think about that meme that's like, the divorce came out of nowhere. I was blindsided. Were you though? And I bring this up because I think that since Greek mythology tends to get the fandom treatment, a lot of people who claim to love Odysseus as a character have never read the Odyssey, and I have no problem with that. There's a big difference between the way that a character is in one adaptation versus the way they are in the source material, and you can love one and ignore the other. But because of that, I think a lot of people have this idea that Odysseus is this like wife guy who loves and respects women. And, you know, they might be a little disappointed if in Nolan's version, it's more in line with who he is here. Even though that scene makes me angry every time I read it, I do wish that more adaptations included it, just because I think it's an important conversation to be had. Like, is Odysseus respectful and loving to all women or just to exceptional women? Another question that we need to ask ourselves when adapting another version of the Odyssey is, who is allowed to be a victim? Odysseus has the capacity to be a lot of things, both good and bad. He went through a lot of things on his journey. He is both the victim in some scenarios and the perpetrator in others. But because he is the main character, I think that a lot of adaptations have the tendency to change things in order to make him appear less weak or to make him not look like a bad person. There aren't that many named women in the Odyssey, and two of those women are antagonistic figures, Circe and Calypso. A lot of adaptations that I have seen will remove the threat entirely by erasing those characters from the adaptation, or by turning them more into sexy obstacles than real threats. And I have both the same critiques and individual critiques of both the erasure and the femme fatale other woman trope that's used for both Circe and Calypso, because I think both characters represent two very different things, and I think it's important that we discuss it. A lot of people struggle with the idea that a man can be the victim when it comes to an issue with sexual consent. And so instead, they try to flip Odysseus into being this ladies' man.
Brave Odysseus. Are you still a man?
Or they just ignore those scenes altogether because they don't want him to appear weak, which I don't like. There's this denial that women can also be perpetrators of the same kind of abuse that they are subject to, that they can't be the aggressor, and I think it's a shame. I think the main reason that this tends to be so tricky for people to wrap their heads around is that, at least with Circe, for example, there's a large debate about whether or not what he experienced counted as sexual assault, or if it was at most dubious consent. There's a bit of a gray area, at least with Circe, which I hate to have to say, but it's relevant, because when it comes to his relationship with Circe, it's usually presented as some kind of exchange. Hi, I'm back from the future. One thing that I wanted to say is that I realized while I was editing that the word that I wanted to say was transactional. Their relationship to each other is very transactional, and that's something that we need to keep in mind. Their relationship with each other after they make this little deal is very casual. I have personally never interpreted this relationship to be some kind of romance, some kind of passionate love affair, despite the fact that a lot of the adaptations make Circe out to be this sort of jealous lover when she realizes that he wants to go back to Penelope. I don't think it's supposed to be interpreted that way. Cheating is a big word that gets used a lot when we talk about his relationship with Circe, and unfortunately, I do think it depends on how you interpret it. While yes, in 2025, with our eyes, we can absolutely tell that there is a power imbalance going on, which is why a lot of people count it as SA or as dubious consent. But unfortunately, we need to think about the way that it would have been interpreted at the time. And unfortunately, I don't think that they would have seen Odysseus as a victim the same way that they didn't see a lot of women as victims. They didn't really think about that at all. And also, while I'm at it, cheating was very odd. They had a weird concept of monogamy. So while yes, cheating existed, I don't think we're supposed to see Odysseus as a cheater, whether or not you see it as SA, like whether or not he willingly engaged with these women or not, specifically Circe. I don't think it would have counted as cheating either. It's really tricky because it seems like it really only counts as cheating in very specific circumstances. Like, we know that, for example, Zeus is an unfaithful husband, but Odysseus is never described as such. Meanwhile, despite the fact that we know that Agamemnon took a bunch of women as his war prizes, Clytemnestra is the one who gets called unfaithful for her affair, because misogyny, it's tricky, it's confusing. And obviously I'm going to talk about this more as we continue this section of the video. I just want to bring up that I personally am never going to be mad at somebody for having a very black and white view of this scene, because it is very tricky, it is very heavy subject matter, and in any way that you want to interpret the scene, that is completely up to you, and I understand it. I just think that we need to keep that in the back of our minds going forward. Odysseus sleeps with Circe because Hermes advises him to. When she strikes you with her long wand, then draw your sharpened sword and rush at her as if you mean to kill her. She will be frightened of you and will tell you to sleep with her. Do not hold out against her. She is a goddess. If you sleep with her, you will set free your friends and save yourself. Tell her to swear an oath by all the gods that she will not plot further harm for you. And while you have your clothes off, she may hurt you, unmanning you. And that's exactly what happened. Circe literally says, through making love, we may begin to trust each other more. And Odysseus answers, Circe, how can you command me to treat you gently when you turned my men to pigs, and you are planning to play tricks in telling me to come to bed with you so that you can take my courage and my manhood when you have got me naked? I refuse to come to bed with you unless you swear a mighty oath that you will not form plans to hurt me anymore. And she does. Her character, at least the way that she's written in the Homeric text, is kind of supposed to be a former threat turned ally, which, you know, to a modern lens is icky. Odysseus is a mortal man who's desperate to get home and also desperate to save the crewmen that he has left. So this can feel like she's taking advantage of him.
You cannot refuse a goddess. Only then will she surrender your men.
But at the same time, Circe is written as one of those wild women can be tamed by men, and that also rubs people the wrong way. It's completely understandable why this scene is so controversial when it comes to adaptations. She's a goddess, she poses a threat. Is it really consensual at all? But a lot of people also want to use this scene to write Circe in a more positive light because, you know, it is pretty sexist. A major plot point here that has not aged well is that Circe has to be brought down a notch. She has to become submissive almost. She begs him not to kill her by using her body. And one thing that I think is really interesting about how adaptations handle Circe specifically is that a lot of adaptations will either compare her to Penelope or use her to explain to the audience that even though Circe is, you know, this beautiful goddess, Odysseus is still yearning for Penelope. Like, even if they have this affair, for lack of a better term, his heart belongs to Penelope, and she is well aware.
A miserable kingdom, a wife who grows old.
And on the way, wonder if your wife's memory is as strong as yours.
And I also want to take a minute to bring up the fact that multiple things can be true with how you interpret this scene. You could interpret Odysseus as being a victim of SA through coercion, which I absolutely do think that. And you can interpret this scene as a very sexist scene in order to depower powerful women. And it's also worth pointing out that Circe is a goddess, and like many of the other gods in the Greek pantheon, she is going to be doing some things that are incredibly morally questionable. Like Zeus, she can be both a terrible person and a possible ally. When Odysseus needs to leave the island, Circe gives him advice and also sends winds to help him sail across the sea. I am both a little scared and a bit excited to see how Christopher Nolan is going to interpret Circe as a character. And then there's Calypso. There is no complicated relationship with Calypso. Calypso is keeping that man captive. Page 1. All the other Greeks who had survived the brutal sack of Troy sailed safely home to their own wives, except this man alone. Calypso, a great goddess, had trapped him in her cave. She wanted him to be her husband. When the year rolled round, in which the gods decreed he should go home to Ithaca, his troubles still went on. In this scene, Athena is essentially begging Zeus to help Odysseus, and she says, his daughter, Calypso, holds that poor, unhappy man, and tries beguiling him with gentle words to cease all thoughts of Ithaca. But he longs to see even just the smoke that rises from his own homeland, and he wants to die. A lot of people tend to compare Circe and Calypso to each other, but I don't think that the two of them are the same. Odysseus does not have the same relationship with both of these women. She has no intentions of letting him leave at all, and she is keeping him hostage on this island.
I can make you immortal!
Because I keep checking on if there's any news about this specific adaptation of the Odyssey by Christopher Nolan, I get a lot of alerts on Twitter. And a lot of discourse came out when Christopher Nolan said that the movie was going to have an R rating because of certain sexual scenes. And people lost their mind. And they said something along the lines of, if this is because of Circe or Calypso and not Penelope, I am going to riot in the streets. And I sort of get what they mean. That they don't want to see something like that happen on screen. I'm the same way. That kind of content is not for me. It's one of my no-nos. I can handle horror movies. I watch a lot of horror movies. But the minute it's a non-consensual scene, I can't stomach it. So I understand what they mean by that. But I do think it's really interesting that a lot of modern audiences don't want to engage with that at all. They want to completely remove that kind of subtext or just text from adaptations of the Odyssey completely because they find it problematic and they don't want to talk about it at all, which is so odd to me because it's a theme in the story and we can discuss it in a respectful way. Jumping off of that, I also think it's really interesting that when people talk about the lack of sexual consent being a theme in the Odyssey, they forget that Odysseus isn't the only character to experience this. I just noticed that you can see the tag. I previously mentioned the Emily Wilson translation of the Odyssey in my last video, and a lot of the criticisms of Emily Wilson's translation comes from the fact that a lot of people didn't like that she called the rape of the servants rape. She didn't skirt around it. And I think that if a director ever wants to adapt and maybe update the Odyssey and wants to avoid outdated portrayals of women, the least they can do is take the lack of sexual consent into account, even if it makes Odysseus look like the bad guy. Because when Odysseus kills off the suitors, he also kills off female servants there because they have helped those men. But a lot of them are just doing what they need to do to survive in a house full of men that won't leave them alone. The slave who loved her master answered, "Child, I will tell you exactly how things stand. In this house we have 50 female slaves, whom we have trained to work, to card the wool, and taught to tolerate their life as slaves. 12 stepped away from honor. Those 12 girls ignore me and Penelope, our mistress." I briefly mentioned this in my last video when I was talking about how a lot of feminist retellings also ignore women of a lower class. I do think that it's relevant. The theme of lack of sexual consent isn't just about Odysseus with Circe or Calypso. It also absolutely includes the slave women that lived in their house in Ithaca. And there's an argument to be made, perhaps, that the women who dishonored their master were not the same women that were essayed, because there's 50 servants. But I don't really think the suitors cared about consent, and considering those women were slaves, I don't think that was at the forefront of their mind when they were simply trying to survive in this house. Back in college, I took a world mythology class as one of my English electives, and this wasn't a discussion that we had in class. It was a discussion that I had with some of my peers. Whenever some of the girls brought up what was going on with the servants, there was a lot of back and forth, because people read that, and by people I mean some of the men in the class, would read it as, we're only bringing this up to disregard what Odysseus went through. And I don't think that's the case, because most of the people that bring this up would also acknowledge that what happened to Odysseus does not count as a consensual relationship. But two things can be true. Odysseus can be a victim, and he can also harm other victims. Those are two things that are not mutually exclusive and happen in real life today. Another thing that I don't like in adaptations of the Odyssey is when they add an unnecessary romance. All of that with Calypso and Circe aside, whenever they shoehorn in a romance with a character that it doesn't need to have a romance, it's so odd. Ulysses 1954 is completely free on YouTube, last time I checked, by the way. And it is interesting in parts, but there is a bizarre plot point where Odysseus has amnesia and falls in love with Nausicaa, and is going to marry her when he regains his memories and has to essentially leave her at the altar. Also, and this could 100% be not true, I'm not accusing Christopher Nolan of doing this at all. There is no indication that this is a thing that is going to happen. I have not seen a full trailer. The only thing we've seen is that teaser trailer when I went to see Jurassic World. Okay? So I can't say that this is real. Do not take this as me saying that this is real and is going to happen in the movie. But after Zendaya was cast as Athena, allegedly, I saw multiple people on Twitter say that they're worried that because Zendaya might be playing Athena and because Tom Holland is playing Telemachus, that there might be some romantic tension in their scenes. And I kid you not, I was like that meme of the guy with the shirt that says "No Fear," and then a shirt walks by and it's like Zendaya and Tom Holland kiss as Athena and Telemachus, and then it was like "One Fear." That's me. Because I swear to you, if I am happy-go-lucky in that movie theater and out of nowhere I see even a sparkle behind the eyes, I'm leaving the theater, I am buying a plane ticket, and I'm going to Christopher Nolan's house. For legal reasons, this is not a real threat. This is a joke. Another thing that people get wrong a lot, and I've touched on this before, is the lack of respect of the source material. Why are you making something if you think that the source material is stupid? I fear that this happens a lot with Greek mythology specifically, because a lot of people view Greek mythology as cool for a fantasy, but they don't want to engage with it as an ancient religion, which is how we end up with so many characters in those 2010s blockbuster movies who are weirdly agnostic. And once again, I have only seen a teaser trailer. I can't say what Nolan wants to do with this movie at all. Based on this poster, however, I am a bit concerned, because what do you mean by defy the gods? A lot of adaptations of Greek mythology will have the character be this like cool macho guy who doesn't need to respect the gods because he's cooler than the gods and he can beat them at their own game, and that feels antithetical to Greek mythology. Like, that's not the point. I really like Epic the Musical, for example. So know that this critique does not come from me being like a hater or anything. But a big example of this is the showdown between Odysseus and Poseidon that happens at the end. That's like the one song that I just didn't like. It just kind of felt like a superhero movie. It just feels, for lack of a better term, too modern. I'm gonna be saying that a lot, unfortunately, because, you know, like in the Odyssey, Circe tells Odysseus what he needs to do in order to survive the whole Scylla thing. And Odysseus says, "Goddess, please, tell me the truth. Is there no other way? Can I somehow circumvent Charybdis and stop Scylla when she tries to kill my men?" And Circe answers, "No, you fool. Your mind is still obsessed with deeds of war, but now you must surrender to the gods. She is not mortal. She is deathless evil, terrible, wild, and cruel. You cannot fight her. The best solution and the only way is flight. I am afraid if you take time to arm beside the rock, she will attack again with all 6 heads and take 6 more." Odysseus is able to survive this entire journey because he took aid from multiple gods. He did what they told him to do to survive. Yes, he angered Poseidon, but he also did what Hermes told him to do. He did what Circe told him to do. He did what Athena told him to do, and they rewarded him by helping him throughout the story. This whole defy the gods thing has never sat right with me because there are multiple gods.
What's he gonna do? Challenge all of them to a fist fight he can't win?
And finally, and this is entirely nitpicky, my last issue with Greek mythology adaptations is when they cut too much of the story. Unless this is a movie like SpongeBob SquarePants that is very loosely based on the Odyssey, if you want to tell the whole story, tell the whole story. I don't care if that movie is long. I don't care if the movie is 3 hours long. I watch Lord of the Rings, the extended edition, every time I do a marathon. I am willing to commit if the movie is good. Both fortunately and unfortunately, I'm not particularly worried that Christopher Nolan is going to make a short movie. The question is, will it be fun to watch? Because, you know, unpopular opinion, I got bored watching Oppenheimer, which a lot of people were shocked by because I'm like a history nerd, but like I was falling asleep. Category 2 is what I like in adaptations, what I want to see in this new version of the Odyssey. Number 1, earnestness. I'm okay with artistic liberty as long as those choices are made for a specific purpose and not just for aesthetics. I want to feel something. I want a story with heart. I want a story that's not afraid to be cringe. Number 2, empathy, especially during moments of tragedy. I can't stand people who chose to adapt a well-known tragedy and ignored the tragedy part, or included the tragedy part but in the most cynical way imaginable. Why can't you immerse yourself in a tragedy and maybe perhaps have a good cry? Why do you need to talk about a tragedy ironically every time and roll your eyes at the characters for being allegedly stupid, as if you would fare any better in that scenario? We're not in the underworld. The stakes are a little bit different. I call Odysseus an idiot all the time. It's funny when I do it, okay? But if I were to adapt the Odyssey, I'm not suddenly going to take away every single one of his flaws and give them to someone else so that he can stay the smartest guy in the world who's never made a single mistake. That's dumb. The flaws are what make him a compelling character. He didn't have to say his name to the Cyclops. He didn't have to do that. He did it because of pride. Pride is a flaw that he has. We can include that in the movie. And unless this is like a comedy or a modern retelling or a version for children. I also don't care if every member of the crew survives. In fact, I hope that in a new adaptation of the Odyssey, we get to hang out with the crew. We get to befriend the crew. We get to know them as people and then watch them all perish. I want it to hurt more, actually. Whenever I talk about tragedy, I now immediately think of the Iphigenia movie from the 60s. If you haven't seen it, I'm going to keep recommending it every single chance I get. It's on YouTube for free. You can watch it at any time. I think it's also on Tubi, but I could be wrong about that. But Tubi is also free. If you don't know the story, I'm going to be very brief. I'm not going to tell you all of the nuances or whatever. Please go watch the movie if you can. But Agamemnon sends word to his family during the Trojan War that he is marrying Iphigenia, that he has married her off, and that she should come to their camp to get married, basically. It's like, you know, surprise wedding kind of thing. And she's really excited when she gets there, only to find out that that was all a lie, and that Agamemnon means to sacrifice her. The movie is mostly dialogue. It is either A, multiple different characters begging Agamemnon to leave this girl alone and to let her live, including Iphigenia herself on her knees with her own baby brother. Or B, begging Agamemnon to hurry up and sacrifice her because it's either her life, one girl, or all of these men. If the movie had suddenly decided to change the ending and have Iphigenia live because, I don't know, Agamemnon tricked everybody and had a random body instead of Iphigenia and she was able to escape, I would have felt cheated because it doesn't make sense to either of their characters. It would do a disservice to Iphigenia and her whole speech at the end. And honestly, I would have just felt cheated because it didn't feel authentic. Whether I, the viewer, think it is morally right or wrong that she dies at the end is irrelevant because I'm just supposed to be sitting there and watching it all happen in front of me like a car crash. There's nothing that I can do. And this will be a domino effect for Clytemnestra and Agamemnon's relationship later on. And if we remove that, we remove all of this juicy bit as well. Another thing that I really like, and I did mention this in my other video as well, is fun character design. I live for great costumes, contrary to popular belief, because I will be talking about historical accuracy and I'm wearing this, but this is not meant to be an ancient Greek costume. This is my vampire costume from last year's Halloween, and I like to dress in theme for my videos, and this is the closest that I have. I tried my best, okay? The Iliad and the Odyssey have really interesting depictions of the gods, and I think we should play around with that more often. The gods come to them in various disguises. We can have fun with casting. We can cast multiple people for the same role. Sometimes the gods are amongst other gods and they don't have to be disguised. We could do something so fun with their clothing, with their features, make them look less human. Obviously, I'm not saying that I want the gods to be dressed in, I don't know, super contemporary fashion that doesn't fit into the culture that they're supposed to be a part of, but I do think we can have fun with it. We can give them, I don't know, colored hair. We can give them more colorful clothing, give them more jewelry. Look up what Bronze Age jewelry looked like and go ham with stylizing it. My ideal adaptation of the Odyssey would be animated, mind you, but for any adaptation of the Odyssey, I've had this idea for a little bit recently, which is that the humans, the mortals, should be dressed as period accurately as possible. Once again, I am not an expert, and I tend to mash up Bronze Age fashion and classical Greece fashion, but still, I would like them to be as accurate to the period in which we are setting the story in. And then I want the gods to be otherworldly and ethereal, to not look like they entirely fit in with the mortals, at least when they're not in disguise. If anyone wants to take that idea and run with it, please do. Another thing that I think would be really interesting if we go with something like this is that I think the demigods should be mortal, should look mortal, but something about them should just be off, or something about them should be so beautiful that it feels fake. Like, imagine the scene where Telemachus visits King Menelaus and he sees Helen, and Helen just looks off compared to the other women that we've seen so far. Not necessarily the same thing that I'm picturing, but a good example of this would be the 1968 miniseries, because since it's made in the late 60s, a lot of the choices that they made are anachronistic. Like, they look like it's from the 60s, but it can be a little interesting when it comes to characters like Circe or Athena, or specifically Helen. When we meet Helen in the miniseries, she is wearing a regular kind of outfit like this, right? Like, you know, like a flowing Grecian outfit. But she has this 60s graphic cat eye that makes her eyeballs look humongous. If it wasn't because Nausicaa and her mother also have very similar 60s anachronisms, I would have thought that that was a specific choice for Helen. You can have a lot of fun with casting as well. You could cast different people for the same role. Another example also from the 1968 miniseries is Athena. Athena is played by this actress that I could not tell for the first few scenes if they were a man or a woman, because they were so androgynous looking. And for Athena, I love that. I think a big problem when it comes to adapting characters from Greek mythology is that a lot of people are too scared to actually do any kind of research into what people wore in Bronze Age Greece or even classical Greece, because they're afraid that modern audiences will see them and think that they look dorky. And I think this idea that you can't experiment with fashion that the audience is unfamiliar with is really holding us back. When I first saw Matt Damon as Odysseus, I was a little bummed out when I saw the broom helmet thing, because I thought that this could have been a good chance to try to at least make armor inspired by something that they actually would have worn in Bronze Age Greece. I don't necessarily think it needed to be 100% accurate, nor do I think that that's what Christopher Nolan is trying to do, but it would have been refreshing. And I saw that whenever people, you know, complained about it or lamented that they wanted to see something more historically accurate, and they showed examples of that kind of armor, a lot of people online were like, no, because I wouldn't have been able to take it seriously. I wouldn't have been able to suspend my disbelief because Odysseus would have looked like a dork. But I've seen multiple, like, artistic interpretations of Odysseus in that armor, and it looks fantastic. A lot of people associate period accuracy with pretentiousness. And yes, a lot of people in the historical fashion community can be a tad pretentious. They can be a bit dismissive of work that isn't 100% accurate down to what dyes they used, and that's, you know, obviously unrealistic. But I do think it's connected a bit to the rise of anti-intellectualism, where we can't even say, oh, I wish it looked a bit more like X, Y, and Z, without people rushing to defend a choice that's been made a gajillion times. Like, everyone dresses exactly like this in Greek myth adaptations. The right costume designer can, in fact, look at something like this and still make it work, and still make it something accessible to a modern audience. Not the same time period at all, but it makes me think of Emma from 2020. A lot of people will see clothing from that time period, think it's ugly, and skip it entirely. But if you watch Emma 2020, those costumes are gorgeous. Those costumes are stunning. The costume designer chose the perfect silhouettes, the perfect colors, the perfect hairstyles to put on all of those characters, and it works. I don't watch that movie and think, oh my god, that character looks like a dork. I watch that movie and think, oh my god, look how pretty that coat is. It's entirely possible to do that with ancient Greece. And I would argue that a lot of people subconsciously think of ancient Greece as something belonging to the European identity, to this pan-European identity. This kind of armor and this kind of fashion and this kind of hairstyle does not reflect Europe, and so it feels foreign, it feels alien to them, and it's not worth exploring. The Greeks were all over the Mediterranean. They were interacting with a bunch of different kinds of people. It feels a bit silly to not think that certain things are going to blend, certain things aren't going to look like what you think they should look like. Because ancient Greece has become this kind of symbol, we've kind of stripped it of all of its actual culture. And this is connected to fascism, by the way. I'm sorry for bringing that up in a silly video about the Odyssey. In an article that I read titled "The Classical Roots of White Supremacy" by Danny Bostic, there's this big discussion about how Europe has turned ancient Greece into this pan-European ideal. And Cassie Miller, a senior research analyst at the Southern Poverty Law Center, said that the use of classical imagery is common in white supremacist propaganda. So even though the Odyssey and other myths are technically way older, when we depict them in film, we are usually inspired by classical or Hellenistic Greece. To the average person, it feels more Greek than the fashion that they wore that might have been influenced by their neighbors in North Africa or the Middle East. This isn't even me saying that I want an adaptation of the Odyssey to be as historically accurate as possible, because that might not even be possible. And I am also not an expert, okay? I understand that there are artistic liberties, and also we are making what we can with a very specific budget with modern materials. I understand that 100%. I would just like it if people even tried. Although I will say, Robert Eggers, if you're out there, if you ever want to make an adaptation of the Odyssey and you want to challenge yourself to make the costuming as accurate as possible, I trust you to try. Ulysses 1954 is not a perfect film at all, but one thing that I noticed about the costumes is that when Odysseus is on that island with Nausicaa and you can see her servants, they are wearing tiered skirts that look very reminiscent to something like this. I'm gonna put a better picture on screen. It's something very similar to this, but you can tell that they are merging it with the styles that would have been more trendy in the 1950s. And so it's not 100% accurate, but I can see what the inspiration was, and I have to respect that. I will reserve my judgment until at least a trailer comes out. But based off the on-set pictures that I've seen so far, I'm not really all that impressed. I just kind of find it a little bit boring. We haven't seen that many costumes at all, so I am hoping to be pleasantly surprised. Another thing that I would like to see in an adaptation of the Odyssey, and I know for a fact that Christopher Nolan is going to do it, is on-set locations and practical effects. I am very excited to see the practical effects for creatures like the Cyclops or Scylla even. I would love to see how they're going to handle, things like Circe turning the men into pigs. I'm very excited. Last interruption, I promise. I realized just now that I forgot to mention one thing that I really love in Odyssey adaptations, and that's when they stress that Odysseus is a liar. I love that Odysseus is a dirty little liar. I want that man lying through his teeth for most of the film. I'm being so serious right now. It's one of my favorite traits. A lot of adaptations kind of tone down the lying and the trickery outside of very important scenes because they want him to appear nobler, but the fact that he's a dirty little liar is what Athena likes about him, and I think that's really important, especially if they want to highlight his relationship to Athena specifically. She calls him a master manipulator, she calls him a strategist, she calls him a liar, she calls him stubborn. There are many attributes to his personality that a person would think are negative, but they're what really make his character. I want that man to lie. I want that man to lie, 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 lie. As always, because I will never shut up about this, one thing that I really like to see is playing around with gender. I'm not going to get too into it because I did already talk about Athena, but other than the gods, this is something that I think we can see with mortals as well. Look at Penelope. A lot of adaptations of the Odyssey treat Penelope like an afterthought, or even if they include her and give her a lot to do within the film, give her a lot to say, they tend to ignore anything that isn't surface level about Penelope. Like, yes, she's grieving her husband, but what else? What else could she also be grieving alongside her husband? Because it's not just, oh, my husband isn't here, I'm so sad, I miss my husband. A lot of safety and security is gone. Penelope is incredibly smart. She's incredibly cunning. I would really like it if more adaptations focused on how smart she is, on how she was able to stall for so long. When she makes the suitors do the challenge of the axes, she literally says, "Your motives are no secret. You want to marry me? I am the prize." Gender roles are so important in this story. They even affect her relationship with her own son Telemachus, because now that Telemachus is going through this coming of age, he is the man of the house. He is basically in charge of her. I love Telemachus, but there are still some scenes that, you know, as a modern woman, make me flinch, because don't talk to your mother like that. Don't boss her around. Obviously, this is the standard at the time, and I do think it would be nice if we could explore what she thought, what she wanted, because there's multiple scenes where Telemachus is trying to figure out what to do. It feels like an impossible situation, and he thinks to himself, you know, what am I gonna do with my mother Penelope? Like, am I just supposed to marry her off to a different household? When will I have to make that choice for her? How different would the Odyssey be if instead of a son, Odysseus had a daughter? If it's not a period piece, if you're not trying to make an accurate adaptation of the Odyssey and you really want to have fun with it, those are themes that you can explore. You could do gender blind casting. You could change Telemachus, make Telemachus a girl instead of a son. You could make it so that Penelope is the one lost at sea instead of Odysseus. You could make it so that Odysseus is a woman, and how would that change everything? Jumping off what I just said, another thing that I really like in adaptations is fun casting. Ironically though, I am very picky about casting. A part of me either wants a fully Greek cast, because when you watch a lot of those older Greek adaptations, the Greek actors eat it up. I'm sorry. Irene Papas? I have no choice but to stan. But another part of me would like it if casting directors would choose actors based on the vibe that they bring to the story and not just typecasting. You could do colorblind casting. Sometimes I'll see like people's top choices for a role, and you know, I don't feel interested in seeing it at all because it just feels so expected. And I just want to take this moment in this video to discuss when people of color get cast in stories like the Odyssey. I'm gonna be real honest with you. I see a lot of people on the internet who have never even read a single passage from the Odyssey, with a lot of opinions on one random rumored casting choice, and they never really have anything constructive to say. The second I saw that Lupita Nyong'o was cast in Christopher Nolan's The Odyssey, I knew that they were gonna come in hordes to the internet to type with their little Cheeto-dusted fingers about how bad of a casting choice this is, without even knowing who she was going to play. I saw headlines claiming that Lupita Nyong'o was going to be Athena. Actually, no, Zendaya's going to be Athena. Actually, Lupita Nyong'o is going to be Clytemnestra. Actually, no, she's going to be Helen. Any one of those could be true, and I wouldn't care, because I know that Lupita Nyong'o is a fantastic actress, and I want to see what she has to bring to the table. And yet, every single one of those articles, the comment sections were full of men talking about how there were no black people in ancient Greece, but then they go ahead and fan cast someone like Elle Fanning, who is also not Greek. A lot of the people protesting whenever a person of color gets cast in these projects don't even care about having accuracy. They don't care about an all-Greek cast. In fact, they complain then too. Did you know that there's a whole Reddit thread debating whether or not Jason Mantzoukas is lying about being Greek because they don't think he looks Greek? This idea that only pure white people who look purely white can play a character living in ancient Greece makes no sense, because they didn't even have those same concepts of race yet. They wouldn't have cared. The character Eurybates is described as having black skin, rounded shoulders, and woolly hair. And in page 106, obviously this is this specific translation, it might not be the same page number in your book, but whatever. In page 106, it says, all of the gods took pity, except Poseidon's anger never ended until Odysseus was back at home. But now the distant Ethiopians, who lived between the sunset and the dawn, were worshipping the sea god with a feast. These characters 100% interacted with people who had brown skin, who had dark skin, who had curly hair, who had coily hair. They interacted with people all over the Mediterranean. They themselves might not have looked the way that you pictured them to look, just FYI. Oh, it's not about race. It's about the fact that this is ancient Greece. And so it feels too modern to include so many mixed people, so many black people. It's ancient Greece. But then they also have a problem when modern characters like Annabeth Chase are casted as a black girl in the Percy Jackson series. So really, what is the problem? And we all know what your problem is. Because you're also not fan casting actual Greek actors. You're not going, oh, I am okay with Lupita Nyong'o, but I wish they would have gone with insert Greek actress. You don't care about accuracy. It really reminds me of that article that I read about white supremacy, because there's this quote by Henry Cody Miller that says, traditional humanities curriculum associates multiculturalism with modernity, as if before we had the modern world, we had the white world. When I found out that Lupita Nyong'o was cast in the Odyssey, I was actually really excited, and then I got kind of bummed, because at the time, the prevalent rumor was that she was going to be Clytemnestra, and Clytemnestra is barely mentioned in the Odyssey outside of that scene where they discuss when she kills her husband. And so I was like, that's a waste of Lupita Nyong'o's range unless we do a full flashback to the murder and we show her plotting. And then I saw the teaser. She is the one next to King Menelaus, which would make her Helen, and also a very short role, but, you know, she's got more dialogue, and also she would be cast as the most beautiful woman in the world. That's kind of a ballsy casting choice, and I enjoy it. And finally, my last section is the Christopher Nolan of it all. I like some of Christopher Nolan's movies, but he is not my favorite director, nor is he one of the directors that I would have pictured if you told me there was going to be a brand new adaptation of The Odyssey. While I think Nolan is a great director, I do have some issues with his previous work that I fear might also be issues in this new adaptation of The Odyssey. In his article, Overthinking Christopher Nolan's Aversion to a Female Lead, Scott Campbell writes, Nolan has developed a reputation for either fridging his leading ladies by killing them off for the express purpose of giving a male protagonist a narrative arc, or sometimes they're already dead by the time the story kicks off. And on the odd occasion, they've been reduced to damsels in distress in need of rescuing. The easiest way to zero in on Nolan's curious aversion to female leads isn't only found in the fact that there hasn't been a single one across his 12 feature-length movies to date, but examining how many of them in general passed the Bechdel test. The answer, for anyone curious as to how many of his films feature 2 female characters conversing about anything other than men, is 0. The Odyssey will probably not be an exception knowing the source material. Memento, dead wife. Inception, dead wife. The Dark Knight, murdered love interest. Dark Knight Rises, potential love interest, ends up dead. The Prestige, 2 for the price of 1. Matthew McConaughey's wife in Interstellar, dead. And in a story like The Odyssey, I really need the director to be able to understand how to write women, or it's gonna be just like every other adaptation of The Odyssey. Anyway, that is all I have for today. If you made it to the end of this video, thank you so much. Every time I write a video like this, I think it's not gonna take me that long, and then I'm here for multiple days yapping at a camera, and then I have to edit it, and then the rough draft of the video is like 3.5 hours long, and I have to cut it down, and I never expect to be talking for this long. So if you actually sat through all of this, thank you so much. And also, I love you. All of this is entirely subjective. These are my opinions. This is what I would like to see in an adaptation of The Odyssey. This is what I'm worried about with this upcoming movie. If you have other opinions, please let me know. If you think that this is going to be one of the greatest movies of all time, tell me why. And if you have any other adaptations of The Odyssey that you really like, put them in the comments. And if you've been waiting for me to make this video for a while, because I said I was going to make this video months ago and it took me forever to do, I mentioned it in my last video, which honestly, you know, not many people saw, and I figured they weren't going to because it wasn't an art video and it wasn't a book video either. It was more like a vlog, but I mentioned it there. I am in the process of packing, and when I'm not packing, I'm at work, and so I like being able to spend my free days doing this. And if you waited this long, thank you so much again. Please remember to like and subscribe and comment and all that other good stuff, because if you liked this video, there is one more Greek mythology video that I have burning in my Google Docs that I am hoping to film also this week. Don't know exactly when it's going to come out, when I'm going to schedule to post it, but I'm very excited to make it. It will be much shorter and very silly. Oh, and if anyone knows what to do with these little Muppet pictures, I would also like suggestions. A part of me wants to put it in my sketchbook, but I don't know if I want to do a collage right now. Anyway, bye. Thanks for watching.